Shenyun Performing Arts. You may have seen their ads in just about every city in the US, online, or on this YouTube channel, because we are an affiliate marketer for Shenyun. We sell their tickets through the links in the description sections of our videos. We sell a load of other things too, okay? We sell delicious Taiwanese high mountain tea, link for that is below, and some other weird black ginseng stuff. Okay, that one didn't really sell too well. But why do we promote Shenyun? Well, that is simple, because I believe that their show is the best representation of traditional Chinese culture out there, and I want to share it with our audience. I also brought Jared Madsen in on this channel, who is actually an MC for Shenyun and tours the world every year with the group. Now, you may have heard that about a week ago, the New York Times came out with 3 articles on the same day, 2 about Shenyun and a third one about Fang Gong, the spiritual practice that many Shenyun artists practice. These articles were not friendly towards Shenyun or Fang Gong. The Shenyun articles featured interviews with a small group of former performers, some of whom were disgruntled, having left the company, and made some negative and exaggerated statements. Very different to what many former or current Shenyun performers say.
Recently, the New York Times just came out with an article about Shenyun, and after we saw it, we were really sad because it's just completely the opposite of our experience at Shenyun.
Yeah, I just enjoyed every moment of it. It just felt super magical.
The article about Falun Gong played down the human rights abuses the group suffers in China. If you don't know, Falun Gong was a massively popular Buddhist meditation practice in China in the 90s. And in 1999, then Chinese Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin launched a persecution against Falun Gong in which millions of practitioners were rounded up and put in forced labor camps. Evidence would later come out showing that the communist regime had been harvesting the organs of Falun Gong practitioners against their will for use in organ transplant hospitals. Since the China Tribunal in London in 2019, presided over by top lawyers, it has been pretty much accepted by most media outlets that organ harvesting is happening, and Falun Gong is the most targeted group for this kind of abuse. Except the New York Times, in their recent article, just quoted one person that they presented as an expert, saying that this wasn't the case. Then a few days later, they strangely came out with another article attacking Shenyun called The Dark Side of Shenyun. And then, just last night, they came out with yet another article about Shenyun in which they again used the phrase, the dark side.
The dark side.
Which sounds pretty comical considering Shenyun is one of the most light and bright performances you could see. But why is the New York Times doing this now? Well, Levi Browdy, executive director of the Falun Dafa Information Center, says the Times has been planning this article for a long time.
We knew about they were doing this investigation for over a year. And for the first 6 months or so, it was abundantly clear to us that they were going after a very negative article. So for example, of all the former artists that we know of, they were only contacting the ones that they think had a very specific negative story. All the ones that had no negative story, had left Shenyun and were having careers that were doing fine, none of them that we were in contact with have ever been contacted from the New York Times.
The New York Times has a history of reporting negatively on Falun Gong. In 2001, a delegation from the Times actually met with the leader of the CCP, Jiang Zemin himself, the man who launched the persecution of Falun Gong. And since then, they have, for the most part, had pretty good access to China. There's been a Chinese version of the paper, and they've been the least positive in their reporting on Falun Gong out of the US's 3 biggest newspapers, the other 2 being the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post.
From the beginning, the New York Times was riddled with inaccuracies. It was towing the party line with the CCP and using its talking points in describing Falun Gong, and it led the way in the silence of the persecution, just going years and years and years, completely ignoring gross human rights abuses in China.
In 2019, former Times reporter Didi Kirsten Tatlow recalled how she pitched a series on Chinese organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners to her editors, only to have it rejected by the paper. But let's now fast forward back to this year, and we have 4 articles from the New York Times attacking Shenyun and Falun Gong, and another strange article from New York Magazine, an unrelated publication that was released the same week, talking about how Falun Gong is supposedly taking over Middletown, New York, a town close to where Shenyun has its campus. Yet the article doesn't really point out anything that could be considered foul play. It's more of a piece complaining that Falun Gong practitioners are buying buildings and renovating them, turning them into businesses, schools, and even a medical center. Most people would consider that a good thing, and very close to what this country was founded on. People coming here to practice their religion or spirituality freely and live the American dream. Now, strangely, these articles coincide with leaked information from a CCP campaign to influence Western society's opinion of Shenyun and Falun Gong. In a Falun Dafa Information Center report, they say that the CCP has been supporting 2 YouTubers who are at the front line of these attacks. These 2 YouTubers have also been interviewing this small group of disgruntled ex-Shenyun performers, many of the same people that talked to the New York Times.
We know he's being backed by the Ministry of Public Security, and he has openly on X, on YouTube, talked about he's the one who organized the group of so-called disgruntled artists and brought them to the New York Times. So we know that because he's openly talking about it. We also know that people that are interviewing on his show, which again is fully supported by the Ministry of Public Security, are also interviewing with the New York Times and encouraging others to do so. We have emails, telephone calls, text messages showing that they're doing that.
So while we can't definitively say that the New York Times is taking direction from the Chinese Communist regime, we can see that they are in fact coordinating with online influencers who are backed by the regime's Ministry of Public Security. But again, why now? Why at this moment in time is the Chinese regime pulling out all the stops to influence Western society's view of Shenyun and Falun Gong? Well, right now there is a piece of legislation in Congress that has already passed the House called the Falun Gong Protection Act. It is a very powerful piece of bipartisan legislation which, if it becomes law, would give the US government the power to sanction, block property, and revoke visas of any individual who is involved in involuntary organ harvesting in China. It is the most significant piece of legislation on Falun Gong that the US government has ever considered passing. But for it to pass, Falun Gong practitioners in the US need their elected officials on their side. Well, going back to that Falun Dafa Information Center report, there are a few other things in the directives that were leaked out from the CCP. 1. Incite Falun Gong practitioners to distrust and even protest the US government. 2. Provoke the US government to investigate Shenyun Performing Arts and other organizations founded by Falun Gong practitioners. We already see this happening, not just with the 2 YouTubers and with the reports in Western media, but in another example, 2 Chinese nationals living in LA were recently arrested for trying to bribe someone who they thought was an IRS agent to revoke Shenyun's non-profit status. The person they offered a bribe to was actually an undercover officer, and now they both face up to 25 years in prison if convicted. But with all this trouble, why do we continue to support Shenyun? Well, like I said, I believe Shenyun gives audiences the most authentic glimpse of traditional Chinese culture available. Not only does it showcase classical Chinese dance with no influence from modern dance forms, unlike much of what passes for classical Chinese dance in China these days, but also it captures the spirit and essence of classical Chinese culture. China had a culture of what is called self-cultivation, 修炼, or the refinement of oneself through moral principles, which actually represents a link between humans and the divine. You may not know much about this, but if you ask any professor of classical Chinese or Chinese history at any university, they will tell you that this pervaded the entire society from peasants to officials to emperors. Whether it was religious self-cultivation with Buddhism or Taoism, or just following a moral code like with Chinese Confucianism, that is what the society was like. Even their government officials were chosen based on their understanding of the Confucian classics with the civil service examination system. I myself have encountered this profound culture firsthand when I studied classical Chinese at the University of London. And Chinese people believed that this culture was bestowed upon them by the gods. It was a gift from the heavens, and that is what made Chinese culture so precious. Now, Shenyun really captures the essence of this driving force in traditional Chinese society in ways that go beyond what other productions have done. So when they perform Chinese legends that have a moral lesson, or pieces that depict how the CCP is destroying Chinese culture or persecuting Falun Gong, audience members are regularly moved to tears. There is literally footage of audience members crying.
I cry tears of joy all the time, so it was just wonderful to see that and to see the expression from all the dancers.
That actually made me cry, and it was amazing that it could make me cry just from dancing.
C'était tellement fort que j'avais quelquefois des gouttes là qui coulaient.
Maybe it is because many of their performers practice a self-cultivation system themselves, Fang Gong, and they have that link to China's 5,000 years of divinely inspired culture. The very 5,000 years of Chinese culture that the communist regime has tried to destroy through various political campaigns, such as the Cultural Revolution. So when a show comes along that uses the slogan, China before communism, and has the content and inner meaning to back it up, the Chinese regime is scared out of its wits, because anyone who sees that show sees what the CCP have destroyed in mainland China. And that is why on this channel we will continue to encourage our viewers to go and see Shen Yun, to go and see China before communism. Alright guys, that is the video. If you guys would like to know more about Shen Yun, maybe I can get Jared in the studio and we can have a chat and answer audience questions about the show and all the work that goes into creating it. If you like the sound of that, leave a comment below. I'll leave a few other videos on screen now from the Shen Yun community channel, which is hosted by Lishai Lemish, where he interviews former and current performers, many of which I showed clips of in this video, and you can see what they're saying about Shen Yun Performing Arts. Otherwise, please subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.